You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 28. This podcast is dedicated to circus. It's a place for professionals to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for outsiders to get a sneak peek into the industry. Hey friends, fans, and enemies, I'm Shannon McKenna, and I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. The Artist Athlete podcast is sponsored entirely by monthly donations through patreon.com. Patreons who give $5 or more a month get access to episodes early, an Artist Athlete podcast sticker, and every once in a while, I'll drop in some cool discounts or other fun stuff. You can donate as little as $1 or as much as $500. To become a Patreon, go to http://www.patreon.com/theartistathlete. Today's episode is a little bit of an Artist Athlete special report, which is just a thing I made up right now as I'm sitting here. But if you're one of the 17,000 members of the group Safety in Aerial Arts, you've seen and heard some pretty active discussion about welding aerial equipment lately. I don't want to get into the particulars of recent events. However, I did think it would be helpful to run an episode about aerial equipment fabrication. And almost at the same time I was having that thought, I got a direct message from a welder named Kaz suggesting the same thing. Kaz has been teaching and performing flying trapeze as a catcher and flyer since he was 15 in Florida, training with circus greats such as Dolly Jacobs and Pedro Reese. He became an instructor at Club Med, then for TSNY in Boston, before opening his own flying trapeze school in Athens, Georgia. In addition to his work as a circus performer and teacher, he is also a professional welder. He works for Caterpillar, the world's leading manufacturer of construction and mining equipment. In addition, he makes aerial equipment custom to order. Kaz came to my place in Atlanta. He drove all the way from Athens, he brought 2 steaks and a bottle of wine, and we talked for 3 hours about rigging, welding, and flying trapeze. I'm super thankful that he shared his expertise, and I hope this interview helps aerial artists out there become better informed about their equipment, leading to an industry that's better educated and, as a result, safer. Here's my interview with Kaz. Kaz.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, of course.
What is Kaz short for?
Basically, I earned this nickname through martial arts. And then when I went to Club Med, they're like, okay, so they're making your name tag, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, all right, what's your name? And I go, oh, they're like, oh, we already have lots of blah, blah, blahs there. They're like, do you have any going for anything else? And so I was like,
oh, you're saying blah, blah, blah because you don't want to actually say your name.
Right.
It's only a secret name.
Secrets.
Okay.
No, but it's most, everybody knows, like, literally I would actually change my name to Kaz legally, but my mom might be a little disappointed.
Right on.
But almost everybody knows me as Kaz except for my immediate close family.
And can you tell the people at home what you do?
Well, I tell people I'm a flying trapeze and circus instructor. So that's my purpose in life. So I've been doing that since I was 15 years old. But for the last, maybe say 7-8 years, I've been a fabricator, welder for various companies, and now currently for Caterpillar, and I make excavators.
What are excavators?
So like instead of a bulldozer, the excavator's got the big arm.
They go underground.
Well, they don't go underground, but like they dig trenches, right? It's got the bucket on the end.
Oh, that's called an excavator?
Yeah.
I did not know that about giant machinery.
Or as my son calls them, diggers.
Diggers. There you go. Now I know what you're talking about.
There we go.
So you're a welder.
Yeah.
That's why you contacted me and why I wanted you to come on. So thank you.
Oh, of course.
Can you talk about what welding is and why it's important for circus?
Yeah, so welding is basically the use of electricity to join similar metals together. And we won't get into the other of joining dissimilar metals together because that's a different topic and not kind of related. But
cool.
But basically, yeah, you're just using electricity for the positive and negative, and it creates literally like a lightning arc. Mm-hmm. And then that melts the metal that you're using, and it's pretty much used in everything and holds our world together. And it's as prevalent as concrete. It's hard to explain how much welding you interact with in a daily basis.
Like, has anything been welded on this toaster oven?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. And in circus, it's used mostly for, I can think of it as uses for as aerial equipment, mm-hmm. really, really large structures like Wheel of Death.
Yeah, so also like buildings, right? So your ceiling structure, a lot of that is welding too. Portable rigs, those are all welded. Mm-hmm. Anything like small goods is probably not going to be welded. Okay. So like carabiners, that's factory made or found or cast. So there's not so much welding in that area.
And how did you become a welder?
So my wife at the time was like, hey, what happens if you get in a wheelchair and you can't teach circus anymore? And I was like, I'll still pull lines from my wheelchair. No. But no. So she's like, oh, good point. So I went to a night school. So for 6 weeks, I went to learn how to weld. I didn't get any certification. It was just like, hey, this is how you do this stuff.
Wait a second. Is that true for any kind of welder?
There's many different ways people can get into it. And a lot of people traditionally get into it by either going to school for it. A lot of like trade school, high schools will have that. Or a community college has it, or people get into it through family business.
But it's not an industry where, it's not like being a doctor, say, or something like that, where you have to pass these board exams.
No, not at all. I mean, you can go right now to Home Depot and buy a welder and try it out for yourself. Which is...
Damn.
Yeah, which is fun, but also scary when you apply it to our situation right now.
Yeah, for sure. If that's the case... How do you know that you're a good welder?
Only through outside verification. The most normal way is through you're going to get a job welding. I kind of started out making handrails, and that takes a lot of math actually. But not so much welding skill, as long as it stayed together. I mean, it's not a whole lot of pressure put on handrails. Like, okay. It's just like anything else. You start at the bottom and you suck, and everybody tells you suck until you stop sucking, and then you're giving more responsibility. And
could any professional welder make, let's say, an aerial hoop or a lyra?
In a sense, they could, right? So if you told them, hey, I need this size pipe to bent like this with this insert, I mean, you need to know your equipment and how it functions, what forces you're going to put on it, what it's going to be doing, and then, yeah, they could basically glue it together. But it does help to have someone who's seen circus and has some relation to it in a sense. You know, they don't do it directly, mm-hmm. but it's good that they kind of have seen it before, know what forces are acting upon it, and they can make at least recommendations on, this is what I think. A lot of people will come to them like, oh, I want to have a lyra made, and they're going to ask you, okay, cool, what size pipe or what size tubing you want to, what materials you want to use.
Yeah.
And if you don't know those things, right,
sure.
You know, what parameters of equipment and materials are going to use, you know, then they're going to make guesses, and that's where problems can come up.
How would an aerialist start to know what to request from a welder?
Just like in almost any industry, like we talked about before, like reputation and quality of work are everything. Mm-hmm. Well, not everything, but a huge chunk.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right, and I would say even more than certification. It's through kind of word of mouth in a sense. I mean, you can look it up, obviously. But it's good to go to someone who makes these. I mean, you can call these people up and you can ask them. They'll be happy to tell you. You know what I mean?
So like if someone called you up and said, I want a lyra, what are the questions that you would ask?
What are you doing with your lyra? What kind? Are you doing very dynamic work? You know, do you want a solid lyra? Are you looking for a lot of spin? Like, like what kind of forces are you going to be doing, are going to be enacted upon this piece of equipment?
That's so interesting. It's helpful for you to know the style of what that person does.
Yeah, because I mean, if someone may want like a light lyra, you know, for solo work, or if you're doing doubles work, you know, you might want a bigger lyra to fit both of you inside of it or do other stuff. And in a sense, like, it's always good to like overbuild a little bit for that safety factor.
What do you mean by overbuild?
I mean, you might, like, you say you could go with a thinner material, but it's like, okay, well, I could do that for lightness if they really wanted that, but as a general rule, it's better to go with kind of thicker material. Like 90% of lyras are made with Schedule 40 pipe.
Schedule 40.
Yeah, and that's like almost quarter inch, thick, or I think 3/6, yeah, something like that.
All right. Now, I didn't know that actually, but there you go. I don't do hoop for a lot of these reasons.
Wait, maybe not quarter inch. I'm sorry. It's 3/16.
3/16?
I mean, it's pretty solid.
Schedule 40.
Yeah.
Is what? Okay.
Most people use.
Is the standard? Would you say this is the other thing I think is really interesting, and I don't know what this is in other countries. There's a little bit of reference to this in some places. I like that you're getting out your phone. Fact check now.
Yeah, I'm gonna check.
Keeps me from doing it later. That there are not really these regulations in circus for like every aerial hoop should be made with Schedule 40 steel or should be made in these ways. Mm-hmm. Do you know if that's the case in other countries? Do you have any?
I don't. I contacted other makers and I was like, hey, I don't really know outside of the US if they require. I know in rigging it's a lot different. Like in Europe and overseas, they require a lot more paperwork and certifications for rigging, as far as I know. It's like much more regimented.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that applies to circus equipment. So I can't really speak to that too much. But I do want to find that out so I know myself.
Well, maybe I'll try to find another rigger or welder from a different country and get in touch that way. All right. So the aerialist has called you up. They've like gotten their equipment from you. You've welded it. You've sent it to them. Mm-hmm. How do they know that your welds are good? How can they check? Or is that something that they should be doing?
Yeah, that's
because we kind of had this discussion a little earlier.
Right.
Like,
it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah, like if you're going to buy a piece of aerial equipment from a fabricator, do you think it's the aerialist's job to check?
It should be, and when they first get it, obviously when you get new equipment, you're like, oh, you want to look at it. And I'll only speak to what I do. I like to involve my customers in every step of the way. I take pictures, and I actually do a lot of live Instagram feeds of like me making it.
Oh, cool.
And so I'm like, hey, this is what I'm doing. So you can see the process. You can see everything I'm doing. There's nothing hidden. Like I try to involve them and I try to inform the buyer, okay, this is the material I'm using. This is what I'm doing. And then that way they have a deeper understanding of the product they're getting. So if there's an issue, they kind of have, hopefully there's not obviously, but there's going to be, a little bit more just like, oh, my stuff broke. Why? Right? And so they can come to me or whatever.
The original question, no, people do this all the time. It's really cool. So if the piece has been welded, they've watched you do it, all of that, but it comes to them, you inspect your equipment for the first time. Mm-hmm. What should an aerialist look for in a weld to make sure that it's a good weld?
Right. And a lot of times, here's the tricky part. A lot of times fabricators will blend their welds because a lot of aerialists are moving on their equipment, they're grabbing it. Mm-hmm. So they want to have soft, smooth surfaces. So a lot of the welds are going to be blended together. And that's not always the case.
What does that mean, blended?
Meaning like they're going to take a grinder and they're going to like smooth everything out so it's nice to touch.
So like the weld is like
you're not going to be able to tell that it's a weld sometimes. It's just going to look like part of the apparatus. It's not going to be like, oh, here's a bar, here's a weld, and here's another bar, right? A lot of times it's going to be blended together. And when that happens...
So the weld creates like material around the two pieces and then they sand that or grind that down?
Yeah, they grind that down because now the weld and the base metal should be kind of like what we call tied in or... penetrated into the, right? You shouldn't, like if you cut that weld in half, you shouldn't be able to tell where the base metal ends and the weld starts. It should look like one uniform thing, right? The one thing you can look for is porosity, which is if you look at a weld and you see like pinholes or like holes in the metal, that's one of the most obvious signs that that weld is no good. So if it looks like Swiss cheese,
what causes porosity?
Porosity is when there's a contamination in the weld from either liquid or most commonly it's a gas issue. Like, so when you're welding, gas is coming out of either the TIG welder or the MIG welder and it's covering the weld. It protects the weld from the atmosphere. And so if that gas is interrupted, then the oxygen and all that stuff can get into that weld and you'll see it kind of bubble up. It's like...
Okay.
And yeah, it looks bad. And it's really hard to cover up porosity because even if you try to weld over it, the porosity of the gas will still come up through the weld. So you can cover it up, but it's difficult. And it's just easier to grind it out, redo it.
So porosity, is there anything else that people should look for?
And so another one is undercut. Undercut is a less of an issue, but it's still kind of indicative that there might be a problem. And undercut is Basically, when you're welding and if your torch angle or you're moving too quickly with the weld, there's a certain speed you have to go depending on the weld you're doing and the thickness. If you're moving too quick, the arc, which is the electricity that's melting the metal, the arc will kind of eat away the base metal. I know this is really hard to explain.
I'm trying to picture it in my head right now. So you have the steel.
So I do a lot of MIG welding, so that's why I'm going to explain it in. So the wire's feeding out of the gun. There's a gas nozzle that surrounds it, and the gas is flowing over that.
Okay.
And as the wire gets close to the metal, electricity will arc from the metal, and that's what melts the base metal and the wire coming out.
Got it.
And so it creates what's called a weld puddle, right? And I can show you a video later what this looks like.
Cool. And maybe we'll try to link that video for the listeners
for sure.
at home so they can see it.
So that metal is the filler metal and the base metal are melting together, and that's what's fusing the things together.
Okay.
Right? And so what happens is if you're moving too quickly, that arc can kind of eat away the base metal.
Oh, gotcha.
And then it'll leave like this, what looks like a cut, right? It looks like something kind of just took a little gouge out of the metal. And it's not a huge issue, depending on how bad it is and where it is, right? But it can create a stress point, right? And so it's basically a weaker area. Okay. That is
so porosity and an undercut. And the porosity are these little like pin-sized bubbles.
Yeah, and that's really easy. That's the easiest thing to look out for. If you see like holes or Swiss cheese or anything like that, that is definitely no good. That means like there's very little metal holding it together.
If you don't see either of those things in your weld of your equipment, can those things happen over time? Or if you look at it the first time and it's good for life?
If you're seeing a clean weld with no porosity and no undercut, that is a pretty good indication that most things are okay. Now, what we're going to get into is the things you can't see, and that's the scary part. Oh. So it's very easy to make a very small, undersized weld that's not strong enough. Okay. But the weld itself is fine, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes total sense.
It's like using...
It is scary.
Right? So it's kind of like using glue, right? You can have two small things and use a little bit of glue and glue them together, and it'll be strong.
I'll pour myself some more wine. I'm so scared of this. Yeah, okay.
But the problem is, if you use the same amount of glue, but now you're gluing two bigger things together, the glue is not the problem. It's how much glue you're using. So a welder should know the thickness of the material, what the material is, obviously. And for this discussion, we're only going to be talking about steel and maybe stainless steel, but aluminum, that should definitely be done by a certified welder. And a lot of equipment is hopefully not made of aluminum.
Wait, I thought you just said you couldn't get certified in welding.
No, you can. You can get certified in lots of welding. Okay, every weld process has a certification.
Oh, okay.
Right. But you don't have to be certified to be a good welder.
I see.
But it's good to be, but it's not required.
But aluminum welding is its own certification.
Yes. So, and even within steel, there's different thicknesses and positions.
This podcast is brought to you by The Artist Athlete. Did you know that The Artist Athlete is more than just a podcast? It's a growing online resource for students of the aerial arts to deepen their journey to badassery by accessing techniques approved by physical therapists and master coaches in the industry. Our current spotlight is on the fundamentals of aerial alignment, a practical manual for hanging upside down. This online manual is a step-by-step guide. It is complete with photos, videos, and exercises that you can implement immediately to help you gain the strength and awareness you need for an aerial practice that promotes shoulder health and longevity and good posture upright, so you don't walk around like a gorilla. But don't just take my word for it. Here's circus physical therapist Dr. Jen Crane of Circ Physio to tell you more.
The fundamentals of aerial alignment is an absolute must-have for every aerialist of every level. I can't even tell you how many shoulder injuries I treat that are a direct result of rushing past the basics in an attempt to get a trick too soon. In the manual, Shannon deconstructs the fundamentals, including the correct muscular engagement to safely arrive in these positions and the rationale for why it matters. Of course, in addition to all of these fabulous pearls of wisdom, the book is also ridiculously fun to read. It's been lovingly garnished with the Shannon humor we all know and love.
Thanks, Jen. Circ Physio is also featured in the book to give scientific insight into why it all works. Pick up your copy today by going to theartistathlete.com and clicking e-manuals. Listeners of the podcast can get a 10% discount by typing in the offer code PODCAST at checkout. Again, that's theartistathlete.com, offer code PODCAST. Now, back to the show. Can you talk about a little bit about the difference between aluminum and steel? Just
so
rigging as well. I think this is
so steel is.
To know.
I mean, I guess the best way to relay it for circus people
Yeah.
is a carabiners and equipment like that, right? So we all know that aluminum carabiners are great. They're strong. They're light, but the fatigue rate is a little bit higher, right? So when aluminum fails, it shatters. There's very little warning that aluminum is going to go or that it's bad. So with steel, you have some warning, like they're going to see cracks or stress happening, and it's going to bend versus just explode and shatter suddenly, right? There's warning signs. So it's kind of the same with aluminum, right? But aluminum, when you weld it, there's certain parameters you have to meet and be aware of. So basically the skill level to weld aluminum is a little bit higher, and the requirements should be a lot higher.
Got it.
Because the failure, right, if it fails, it's like, boom, it goes.
Yeah.
Right? There's like,
right.
With steel, it's like, oh, this is bending, and I see a crack. And
I pretty much exclusively, even though I travel and I would prefer lighter gear,
right,
I don't use any aluminum in my systems.
And not to say there's people that don't make good aluminum stuff, right?
Totally.
It's just like, the requirements for making aluminum equipment should be higher. Like
Gotcha.
You could accept okay work with steel, not okay work with aluminum.
Oh, interesting.
Just make that distinction.
Gotcha. Okay, so you were talking before about the glue in the welds as something that people cannot see. Right. But could a professional welder see that without taking apart the equipment?
If it's ground, it'll be harder. But if it's just you see the weld, right? So we'll relate to the Facebook. I want to stay a little bit. Yeah, we won't say names.
I want to stay apolitical.
Yeah, we will. But I'm just using because people have seen those pictures. So in some of the pictures, you see the welds and you see the size of them, and a lot of the welders are like, "Wow, that's really undersized." So that's what they're talking about. It's like there's not enough weld material, not enough filler metal, and not only that, but it implies there's not enough penetration and heat, because those two things are kind of tied together. So the weld has not penetrated enough into the base metal to hold.
Could an aerialist even determine that?
That's
oh man.
So that's where we talk about non-destructive testing.
Okay.
Which is where in my work for Caterpillar we do ultrasound, right? So they have these critical welds on these structures. A lot of times, a lot of stuff is robot welded, but even the robots mess up. But so we hand weld it, and every weld that's critical is ultrasounded. It's weird. It's exactly like getting ultrasound for a baby. They have this gel they put on the metal, and they have a scanner, and it shoots ultrasound waves in there. And when it does, it reflects what they see on this screen. It's about the size of a tablet.
Oh, that's so cool. So you don't have to break it.
No, yeah.
You just see if it has a baby.
Yeah. Is it a boy or girl? And so what they do is there's certain things they're looking for, and I would caution people about learning how to do all this stuff. People's like, do I need to learn how to read an ultrasound? No, like if you're a circus, we're getting into really technical things that you really don't need to be super concerned about.
Right.
And if you are super concerned about, bring it to a non-destructive testing facility.
A non-destructive testing facility.
Yeah, and what they're doing is they're using radiography, which is an X-ray, or they're using a magnetic particle inspection or an ultrasound. And then you can do a penetrant dye testing, but that only shows surface cracks.
Okay.
So like we're talking about stuff you want to see inside.
Right.
So
okay.
And a good example is lyras. Like lyras are ground smooth, right? Mm-hmm. So you have no idea how much weld material is there,
right?
Because it's all smooth. So if you want to check that, the only way to do is to look inside that. The only other way to do that is if you want to cut it in half.
So if you have a weld and you get it in the mail from a company or something, and there's a whole bunch of porosity, and you called up the equipment maker and they've split town or something, I don't know.
Oh yeah.
That would suck, right?
That would really suck.
Should you just retire it? Like, what do you do then? And I'm kind of asking you a leading question because I thought you answered this really well on the forums.
So that's It's hard to answer because then, right, if you want to fix it, yeah, you could possibly fix it. You could take it to a welder, but then again, right, you have to take it to the right person, right, to know what it's for, what you're doing with it, again, what forces are acting on it.
And I'd imagine there's like a cost-benefit analysis that has to go.
Right,
exactly. Paid for the hoop, so how much more do you want to pay for a welder to go back in and mess with it?
Most welders are getting paid at least $50 an hour if they're independent.
Oh, man. Nice.
Yeah, that's like baseline.
I'm in the wrong industry.
Yeah, I mean, oil rig welders make bank.
Podcasters do not.
Do it for the love.
Yeah.
And keep everybody safe. You can also go into warranty stuff, right? So if you have someone fix it, then the guy comes back and he's like, hey, I had to have this fixed. Why don't you pay for it? Well, they're not going to know who fixed it or if they did a good job or not. So they're like, well, F you.
Got it. You know, so then your warranty isn't valid.
Yeah. Or I mean, not that really stuff comes with warranty because it's such a small industry.
Yeah, totally.
But, you know.
Yeah, that's like, we were talking about this earlier, how it's so self-regulating that we really have to be on our shit.
Right.
I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit, but you've run a flying trapeze rig and like owned one. Yeah. So you know a bit about rigging. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask, like, what is the difference between someone who is a rigger and a welder?
There's similar goals, in a sense, to keep people safe and make sure that the equipment you're using is the right equipment. But basically a rigger they're kind of managing the same thing. They're managing forces and making them safe for people and keeping people safe. And so a rigger, I think, is dealing with all the connection points and structures that people are using. And if they're the right structures, the right connection points, right equipment, right? And so I guess to say welder is doing all of that, but he's more worried about the specific equipment that people are using. But he still has to take all those things into account.
So you still take into account how much force is being acted on everything?
Yeah, you mean that goes into your material choice, right?
Sure.
How how much does this person weigh? What are they doing with it? You know, is it double partner stuff? You know.
Do you weld a flying trapeze bar differently than you would weld an aerial hoop?
Yes, because an aerial hoop most generally is hollow, and a flying trapeze bar is going to be solid.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it should be. Anyway.
I have whacked one on my foot.
If you're flying on a trapeze bar and it's hollow, you should need to find a new school.
Yeah. Cool. Is there anything else you want to say about welding? Or I actually have one more question.
Yeah.
Which is, do you think that there could be tighter regulations on welding for circus equipment right now? Is the industry too small? Like, what is
so let's just start as the point of like a person buying circus equipment, right? First of all, you want to have the experience to know what you're looking for. We don't want to tell people.
You want to have the experience to know what you're looking for.
If that makes, like, you don't want to have someone like take a lyric class, like, oh, I want one of these in my home.
Ah, got it. Yes.
Right?
No, you don't want that.
Theoretically, you could do that, but let's not go there. So you want to kind of have that some foreknowledge of like what you want. Like in general, the size. Most people know, okay, I want this size lyra, right? And then you want to do your research and you ask for references. This is where the reputation and quality comes in, right? Ask people, where did you buy your lyra from? Do you like it? You know, and then you can look at people and you can even email those people questions like, how do you build your lyra? Right? And as far as I know, almost every fabricator will be very open with how they construct their equipment because they want to be known as safe. Every fabricator that doesn't have safety and quality in their mind is not anybody you should be talking to.
Totally.
Period. Which makes like all this other situation is such more shocking, right?
Right.
So we thought we had those things, but it's in a way it's good because now it's making people realize like, oh, this is something I need to be aware of and check for to keep myself safe, because it does come down to the individual responsibility, right? So, but it's good. It's increasing everybody's knowledge.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of fear going around. That's okay. It's normal. So just, quality, reputation, and then ask questions. Research.
But do you think that it needs to be like there needs to be some kind of industry standard, or is that even possible?
I think there can be. I don't know if it's big enough yet.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because even now,
it's interesting.
Like a lot of us makers, when we make a lyra, we always put a plug in the center of the lyra to keep it strong at the joint. and there's some people that don't.
What is a plug?
So a lyra is hollow, right?
Yeah.
And so the weakest point, if you just welded those two ends together, that weld joint would be the weakest point. So to mitigate that and create an extra barrier of safety, a lot of us will take a solid steel bar and that'll basically go inside. Right? And so the two bars will come together with what I call a bridge, but it's a plug.
So it's kind of like a pool noodle, and if you want to make it into a circle, you take like a little thing and you
exactly.
Got it.
And the important thing is the welding has to tie in all of those things. The plug, it can't just be welded around the outside, right? It has to the weld has to contact and penetrate into the plug and also the outside lyra. So that's all one unit. And so now instead of being the weakest point, that technically should be the strongest point. But there's makers out there that if say you're getting a tab lyra instead of a tabless, right? So some people, if you have a tab over that joint, they use that as the connector, as a strength. And that's okay. That's okay as long as it's welded right. But, right, so sometimes people sell their lyra and like, oh, I want to make it a tabless, right? What happens if they cut that tab off? It's like,
right, because you don't know if you have a plug or not. I have seen practices, and this is mostly like with I've seen it a couple times with trapezes where you kind of have a title for your trapeze. That's something people make, and they sign it over like this trapeze is made by this person. It was owned by this person. Now it's owned by this person. And you give it to the person who has it next.
Pedigree basically. Yeah, I think that can be important for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I always mark my equipment with my name, Kaz. So people, it's literally stamped in there.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think
that's nice.
So, and then that way people know it's by me, and if they buy it from someone else, they have questions, they can contact me and I'll tell them all about it.
Cool.
Because I pretty much make them the same way every way. Yeah, and then I do believe there should be certain standards, like for maybe how lyras are made, trapezes are made, because a good example is the trapezes, double trap or single trap, like the plate where that attaches from the bar to the cable.
Yeah.
In the Facebook thread we saw where the plate is just attached on top, right? The plate does not go all the way around the bar. Okay. So it's just welded on the top of the bar, and then it has your quick link and then your cable and then so on, right? So the problem with that is, even if it's welded right, there's no backup if the weld fails. Does that make sense? So if there's enough over time, it's gonna fail, right? It's just like all things. So, but the problem is if that...
Whoa. Is that true? Like, once an aerialist gets something and they see the weld is good, over time, should they look for things again?
For sure.
How often?
Obviously, it depends on the use, but I would say for steel stuff that you know is quality maker, at least once every 6 months. Maybe.
Once every 6 months?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even if you're using it kind of regularly, I mean... I would say lollipops maybe more because there's a lot more shearing forces on that.
What is a shearing force?
So shearing is like well, maybe not a shearing force, but a lateral kind of force where you're pulling it off axis, right? Because it's fixed on one point at the bottom, so it'd be really easy to pull it laterally and kind of bend it. But aerial equipment less so because it moves with your motion. Right. So there's not as much force. Sure.
Can weather affect welds? Like if you have an outdoor rig or something like that? Yeah. If you want to check more often?
So with steel, right, you always got to be concerned about some rust. Most rust that people are worried about is surface rust, and that's not a big deal. But if you see rust that's like really, you have big heavy flakes that are kind of coming off, that's deeper, that's kind of cause concern. And even that, as long as it's steel, you can literally take that to a welder and they can clean it out, re-weld it and smooth it out, and you're good to go.
Nice.
In general. What was it? Actually, I'll relate a post by Jen Crane. She made that post about engaging shoulders, and then she made a follow-up post, and the whole title was, "It depends." And so I just want to put that out there.
It depends.
It depends, right?
I know, and that's what gets so tricky about all of this, right?
Yeah, so, and it's always good to
we can only talk in kind of generals or from our own experience.
Right, so if you have any questions, always consult people that know more than you. Right. Or professionals. Even get multiple opinions and stuff. Don't rely on just one source of information. So weather can affect that stuff. Aluminum, not so much, because it's aluminum that doesn't react the same way. Even stainless steel rust, it just rusts slower.
Gotcha.
Because it has nickel and chromium content that slows that. That's what makes stainless.
As a welder, where could people find you if they wanted to order an aerial?
So mostly I'm more on Instagram than anything. So
aren't we all?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But Instagram is flyer_Kaz. So yeah,
cool.
That's where I'm at. And
awesome.
Then,
And do you, when you make hoops, like, do you have like a whole bunch like in a warehouse, or do you make them to order?
No, I make them to order. I'm very, very small. I make them each one custom. Basically, all I've made right now is Lyras.
Okay.
But I mean, I can make static trapeze bars.
Got it. Cool.
Like that. Cool. And other aerial apparatuses. And I'm be the first one to tell you, like, if you come to, like, some lady came to me and wanted a spiral, like a super big one, I was like, no way, I can't make that.
Nice.
I don't have the equipment. And plus, she was in Massachusetts. And so I had no way to, like, make that dismountable, or dismantable.
Those things are so
big.
Too.
And I was
like, she would have to U-haul
the shipping would be like thousands of dollars.
For sure.
I was like, you need to find someone close to you. But so just to recap, I just want to make sure everyone understands, like,
beautiful.
Quality and reputation come first. Certifications are nice, not required. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a good thing to have. It's a good indicator that they know what they're doing, but that's not for sure. Just always do as much research as you can. And even when you get the equipment, don't be afraid to take it to someone else if you have questions and have it checked out. And at the last resort, kind of, if you're really worried about it, non-destructive testing can let you know if the welding is good or bad on it.
Dude, you just did my recap for me.
Oh.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. I want people to be safe.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Ken.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
That was my interview with Kaz. Kaz did an awesome job summarizing this interview during the interview. There are two things that I wanted to add that were omitted. Totally my fault, not his at all. The first is that we talked about how to spot porosity, but not quite how to spot an undercut. Luckily, I have Google. So I went and Googled, what does an undercut weld look like, and got some great pictures. Basically, an undercut is when you can see a visible groove on one or both sides of the weld. As mentioned in the interview itself, Kaz sent over some YouTube links to some welding videos. They are pretty extreme, but I have put them in the description just so you guys can check them out and get a visual of what we were talking about in the episode. The other thing I totally left out, probably because of the steak and the wine, was the question that I always ask at the end of every show. What advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career? So I texted Kaz, and he sent over an amazing response, and I'm going to read it for you now. Kaz says, if you want to weld circus equipment, it's best to have at least some personal experience in doing circus. Have as much exposure to aerial arts and circus as much as you can in general. I would venture to say it's better to go from doing circus arts to learning welding versus the other way, but that doesn't have to be the case. Either way, just as in learning anything, never accept good enough when it comes to welding circus equipment. Even when I think I'm doing a good job in making something, it's always in my mind that I could have done this or that better. I always strive to improve and always be humble enough to seek out help if you need it, or refer a job to another maker if it's outside your skill set or expertise. Always seek to learn new things and acquire new skills. Lastly, always keep the quality and safety of your equipment your highest priority. People's lives literally depend on your work, and that should always be at the forefront in your mind of whatever you're crafting. If you're in the market for a new aerial hoop or lyra, and you want to get in touch with Kaz, you can find him on Instagram at flyer_Kaz, K-A-Z, Kaz. I could give out his email address as well, but it has his real name in it, and I think I'm sworn to secrecy now. As for me, as always, my website is theartistathlete.com. You can follow me on Instagram for aerial training tips and inspiration at _artist_athlete, or on Facebook, The Artist Athlete. And if you want to directly support the podcast, visit patreon.com/theartistathlete to make a pledge. I have some amazing guests coming up in the next few weeks on the podcast. I'm so excited to share these interviews with you guys. Next week, I have Nathalie Gauthier, the talent agent, the mastermind behind Le Petit Cirque in Los Angeles, California. She's a fireball and super passionate about what she does. If you want to hear episodes like this one, like that one, and many more to come, please, please, please subscribe to this podcast. And if you have some time, leave a rating and review. These ratings and reviews really help other people know that this is quality stuff. Thanks to people who have already left reviews, like Emmy Gandolfo, who says, "I'm new to the circus world, and Shannon has the best guests on this show. I've learned so much. It's my favorite podcast to listen to." Catrice Cactus Dust says, "So knowledgeable, with such a fun twist. I love all that Sharon," okay, my name is Shannon, but you gave me a really good review, so I'll let it slide, "and everyone she interviews has to offer and more. All together, we can keep the love of circus thriving. Thank you to the moon and back." Thank you, Catrice. Y'all have a great week, and I'll talk at you later, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete Podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete Podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So, if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and ropes by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete Podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.